Great. So a quick introduction into the project. So some of you will have read the little blurb that we have attached to it, and I've been chatting to some of you who have joined today as well about the project itself. Just to give you a kind of sense of how it connects to myself, it's an unusual project in that it's actually quite more personal to me than a lot of the projects I work on, and it's actually because of my upbringing. I actually grew up fairly close by to Knocksink. I lived in Monkstown there near Dunleary in Dublin when I was young, and Knocksink was actually one of the places I used to go to when I was very young, and it always stood out in my mind as one of those really unusual, really special places. I don't know if I fully appreciated it at the time, but certainly going back to it now as an adult during this project, yeah, I really got a much greater sense of just how amazing it is. So the project isn't going to, as I said, end with the webinar here. This is just the beginning. I'll tell you a bit more about how you can engage with the project further as we go. I'd love to have you with us when we actually meet at Knocksink later on in the project. This will be happening in the new year. All things going well, obviously we'll be able to meet up and actually take part in some on-site work, which I'll go through a little bit as well, which will be really exciting and always a really good excuse to get out and see the area. And if anyone hasn't been to Knocksink, I highly recommend coming out and joining us, because it'll be fantastic and we'll be able to take you through loads of the amazing things that are there. So the project wouldn't be possible at all if it wasn't for our funders. So if I could just pass over now to Tina Roach of the Community Foundation of Ireland, and she's going to tell you a little bit about their involvement. So Tina, it's over to you.
Hi everyone. As Padraic said, my name is Tina Roach and I'm the founder and now the Special Strategic Advisor on Philanthropy at the Community Foundation for Ireland. For those of you who don't know us, the Community Foundation is a philanthropic organisation, and we work with individuals and families and organisations to make their philanthropic journey more impactful. We have supported many issues and thousands of organisations over the last 21 years, from LGBT rights, traveller rights, repeal the 8th, women's rights, including domestic and sexual violence, especially sexual violence. We have funded children's and minority rights, among many others. We support communities, hence the name. And you may know of us through the RTE Toy Show last Saturday, the extraordinary generosity of the people in Ireland that they've shown for children's causes. I think today it's standing at 6.8 million or very close to it. So it's an amazing amount of funding to have raised for children. Over the last 4 years, we have established a fund which focuses on the environment and nature. And we asked donors and the government to support the fund too. So then once we had some funding, we worked with ecologists and environmentalists to set up the first grant round. And we funded 57 communities to work with an ecologist to prepare a community biodiversity action plan. And each plan had recommendations to enhance and restore their community's biodiversities. And of course, to educate people about biodiversity. The outcome, I must say, far exceeded our expectations, because we have really passionate communities about biodiversity and we have excellent ecologists. And the research that we did during the preparation of the plans, we asked that it was sent to the National Biodiversity Centre, and so it will help to build knowledge of Ireland's overall biodiversity. So we're going to continue to build on this, and so this year, we once again put out a call to communities interested in preparing a plan. And also, we went back to the ones that had the plan already done, and we asked them to start to fund some of the recommendations there. So we're funding recommendations and new plans. And as you can imagine, it's totally oversubscribed. So we need to find further funding, and that's what we're doing at the minute. But even bigger than that, because of the state we find ourselves in and the crisis that we're in, the Foundation is examining how we put a climate lens on all our grants, no matter what they are. And we're learning to do this with each of our grants. So in addition to the community biodiversity plans, we funded other national organisations like Hedge Laying Association of Ireland, the Green Economy Foundation, Bat Conservation, Native Woodlands, Birdwatch, Irish Peatlands, the Irish Seed Savers Association, amongst others. And they carry out varied work from natural-based solutions to projects like the one that we're here today to launch. As you know, one of the big questions we face is how we're going to manage to conserve and enhance the habitats of our declining biodiversity and still allow people to enjoy nature. So Leave No Trace is examining how this might happen in Knocksink. You know, it's a wonderful nature reserve. It's a special area of conservation, which is visited by many people every year. And I'm one of those people, as I live in Enniskerry. And I'm really privileged to have such riches on my doorstep. So we at the Community Foundation look forward to the outcome of Leave No Trace's work and how this might be applied elsewhere, because we've lots of learning to do around this particular grant. I want to thank Padraic, and indeed Rachel, and Leave No Trace for letting me speak to you this evening. And I look forward to his presentation, and the Community Foundation is delighted with this grant. I'll now pass you back to Padraic to hear about what they intend doing at Knocksink. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. Amazing, perfect. Great. So yeah, we're exceptionally grateful for the funding from the Community Foundation for Ireland, because without it, the project just wouldn't be able to go ahead. So Tina actually connected with a few of the really important things that I'm going to talk to you about now as well. So if we just hop along now. So just to give you a sense of place, again, many of you are from the area and know Knocksink and know Enniskerry. But for anyone on the call who mightn't be overly familiar with it, just to give you a very brief idea of where we're talking about. So Knocksink Wood Nature Reserve is just beside Enniskerry. It's right on the Dublin Wicklow border. So there's a river that runs through, which is the Glencoen River. It kind of transects the entire park, so it moves kind of from the northwest down along towards the southeast and kind of runs all the way through. So when you go through Knocksink Wood, you'll kind of be beside the river. You're never too far from the river as you go. The area of the reserve is fairly small. It's about 52 hectares, which is about the equivalent of half a kilometre squared or so. There's one kind of known trail there that would go for about 7 kilometres or so out and back. But there are many smaller trails and that run throughout the area as well. But that'd just be the main one that most people would use. Just to give you an idea of the history of it in terms of the name, which is quite fascinating because Knocksink is a very unusual name. And I went searching to see what the name meant to get an idea, because that can tell you a lot about the area. So Knock obviously is hill. That was really easy to find. But to find the sink side of it, that's quite difficult. And one, I don't have a definitive answer for you. You know, someone might actually have a document or something that points to exactly what that means. But I was lucky enough to work with a gentleman recently who studies place names and things and how it's the translations in Irish kind of adapt and evolve over time. And he told me it was very difficult, but he did send me quite a long description of how he's kind of worked out what he believes to be the meaning of the name. But he did stress that he wouldn't write it in a book with what he has. But from what he could gather, Knocksink, he believes it's something along the lines of the hill of the stormy one, based on the translation from Irish. But so you will know if you've been there, hill is a good word because it is, as a valley, it is quite dramatic. So moving you on just a little bit, just to get a more sense of place. So the picture on the right will show, or the picture on the left will show you the map of Ireland, very basic, with the little red dot showing you kind of where Knocksink is. Now, Tina mentioned that Knocksink is an SAC, a special area of conservation. And you can see it there on an SAC map. Now, this is one of the reasons why Knocksink is so important, is because of its SAC status. Obviously not the only SAC that exists in Ireland. They are scattered around. You can look them up exactly where they are. But an SAC is defined as a prime wildlife conservation area, and it's designated by EU Habitats Directive. So they do have quite a high level of protection. And generally speaking, the reason for that status is they're either incredibly delicate habitats, or there's one or many different things there that are ecologically important. So something, usually many things there that make up an area that is unusual, delicate, and exceptionally important. So Knocksink is one of those areas. And there's not a huge number of them in such close proximity to a large population base as big as Dublin City. So it's very easily accessed. It's along a bus route, which most of the SACs you find in Ireland definitely are not along a bus route. So it does come under a little bit more pressure than you might expect to find other SACs. And the only one that kind of pops into my head, an area that is also so ecologically important, but could also face very similar pressures, would be Bull Island, if anyone's been there as well, which has a huge amount of very interesting ground nesting birds that live there at certain times of year, and migratory birds as well. But again, very easily accessible to a large population density. Now, what are you actually going to find in Knocksink? Now, these are the only stock images I have for the whole presentation. All the other images are taken from Knocksink or taken from the surrounding area, but I thought it best I didn't kind of skulk around taking random pictures of people. So I just went with stock photos here. But what you're likely to find in Knocksink when you go there, and many of you have been, you'll find families, you'll find people walking their dogs, and you will find cyclists. There will be your main people who you'll see there. And many of us who visit Knocksink are in those categories. It's not everyone who goes, but this would be the vast majority of visitors to the area. As you might expect, that the number of people who have visited Knocksink since the lockdowns and the pandemic and everything's been kind of shifting and changing has increased dramatically. It's the same all over the country, it's everywhere. So that does put a little bit more stress onto our wild spaces and outdoor areas. Now it's how we combat that where our project kind of fits in here. None of what we want to do is reduce the amount of people who visit or reduce the enjoyment anyone has out of the site, but we want to find a way of keeping that level of visitation and engagement up, but while reducing any of the possible impacts. Now, when you arrive at Knocksink, what you'll be greeted with is a set number of signs, like almost any woodland trail or park, giving you some information. So you'll see opening hours for the car park there, very standard one you'll see everywhere, giving you a sense of when you can go and when you can't. Now, Knocksink is quite different to many of the areas that surround it, and many of the areas that you'll find scattered around Ireland. And the reason it is if you look at this green sign, it's the fact that it's a nature reserve, which is a different designation to special area of conservation. So the nature reserve status, again, defined as it's an area of importance to wildlife, which is protected under ministerial order. So it's that combination of special area of conservation and nature reserve that really kind of push that importance of the site. It is an incredibly delicate area, but it's absolutely amazing in terms of what lives there and the different habitats that are there. I'll tell you a bit more about them in a few minutes. Now, I wanted to frame that because what you'll also find on the site are signs as to what people are expected to do and what we'd hope that people wouldn't do there. Now, some of the new signage you'll see, like you'll see on the left there, is asking people to keep dogs on lead. Now, understandably, this is a little bit of a controversial topic because a lot of people will have very strong opinions on dogs on leads and dogs not on leads. Now, regardless of your view on dogs on leads and dogs not on leads, the important thing is, and it's hard to get across on a sign, but just opening the conversation of why we're being asked to do that in places. And it's different from place to place. The reason why it is important in Knocksink and the reason why you're asked in Knocksink is again because of the nature reserve status, because there are very delicate animals and plants and habitats in the area that can be very easily disturbed, even by the best natured dogs. I have 3 dogs at home as well, so I'm fully aware of how good natured dogs are and how sometimes they can be difficult, not always doing what they're supposed to do. So the example given on the sign there is the woodcock chick. Amazing bird, absolutely gorgeous, but they blend in. You very, very lucky to see one anywhere you go. They are the same color as scattered leaves on the ground. They live in those kind of scattered leaves and that underbrush, and they're very shy and elusive animals. So finding one is extremely difficult, but they are there at the right time of year. The last sign then you'll be greeted with is the one requesting no camping and no fires. And again, the importance of this feeds into, because there are areas around Ireland where camping and campfires can be appropriate if done correctly. But again, the reason is why I want to kind of get across the sense of why you're being asked here not to is very much the fact that it is a nature reserve. It's very difficult to camp and have a campfire that is minimum impact. It's possible, but it's extremely difficult, even if you're very well trained. So where there are areas where camping and having a campfire can have quite minimal damage because the area isn't so delicate, in an area like Knocksink, it can be an exceptional impact on some of the life that is there. So the main thing to kind of take away from this is just to consider the whys of it all. You won't find me, or you won't find anyone from Leave No Trace ever telling you that you definitely can't do anything. We're not rule makers. We're not kind of finger waggers saying no. But what I just want to do is open a little bit of a discussion as to the whys. And I understand that signs it's very hard to explain a why when you have a sign, because signs are traditionally fairly small. And if you put a huge mountain of text on a sign, nobody's going to read it, including me. Nobody's going to read a huge mountain, but you might need to know why to really understand what the sign's trying to tell you. So if you are in Knocksink, engage with the National Parks and Wildlife Service staff that are there and talk to them. If you want to know the reason why something's on a sign or something's happening, just ask them. They're very friendly. They'll tell you no problem at all, and they'll just talk to you. It won't be it will be a fairly easygoing conversation, I'm sure. So the point of this project isn't just to talk about the impacts, but also a celebration of the area itself. And I want to get that across as well, that there are some absolutely amazing things here on site that I want to tell you about, and kind of give you the reason why we want to make a special effort to protect and restore some of the things that have happened here. So I'm going to take you on kind of like a little mini tour through different areas of Knocksink as well. So some of you who are from the area will recognize them, but I have been able to collect a few absolutely stunning images of the wildlife there, which I didn't take myself, but you'll see later on, that you'd be very lucky to see, but can be found there if you've just got that little bit of luck and patience. So I mentioned the Glencoen River, which transects the entire wood. So generally speaking, when you're on the trails, it'll be either side. So you could be to your left, could be to the right. It depends on which side of the bridges you've come across. It's a fairly small river. It's not hugely fast moving. There's a couple of areas of fast moving to it, but it's a nice small river that kind of flows through the wood, and you'll get a lovely sound of it pretty much wherever you are. So the wood is quite funneled in terms of where the trails are, which means you're always quite close to the water, which is fantastic in terms of having that constant kind of little babbling stream sound to kind of follow you along on whatever you're doing. Now, it's hard to get this across in a picture, but the actual valley itself. So anyone who did geography in secondary school will remember your V-shaped valleys and your U-shaped valleys and all that. Knocksink is such an amazing example of a V-shaped valley with such dramatic sides to it. If you haven't been there, when you're walking along the trail, actually just stop and take a moment to look to your right or left, depending on which side of the trail you're on, to look at that valley side of it. It's incredibly steep. It's something I remember from when I was very young, and we used to go there, actually playing on that valley sides. And now I look at it and it gives me a little mini heart attack thinking of kids running up and playing there. But of course, at the time we thought it was fine. But it's incredibly steep, but an amazing, visually stunning area to look at. There's nowhere else in Ireland that has had quite the V shape that I've ever come across, that actual literal V shape that you'll see in things like geography books. Now, again, this is from fairly high up in the valley floor. It is a spectacular view of the area. And when I'm going to take us as if back to the start here, where we arrived. And the first time I went back to Knocksink at the beginning of this project, so I hadn't been there for years and years. There's a small car park there at the beginning of the trail, and I got out of my car. Now, it was a fairly busy Sunday. I was there in the morning. I arrived fairly early. A fairly busy Sunday morning. The weather was beautiful, so to be expected. But what I was expecting in terms of arriving in somewhere like Knocksink again to what was there was a little bit different. And again, I'm going to let you hear what I was greeted with and just have a think about this in terms of impacts to not just to wildlife, but just impacts to ourselves, to our own visits as well. So you'll have heard there the sound of a dog barking and getting slightly further away as we go. And honestly, that dog barked non-stop for about 30 minutes throughout the walk of the woods. Now, I've been that person where, yeah, you do your dogs just go a bit crazy, and they really they feel the need, they get overly excited. So again, not to demonize dog walkers or anything, because that's not what we're doing. But what I want you to think about is just bringing the dog, but then just being able to, after that initial excitement, getting the dog back under control, and the difference that would have had, keeping the dog there, but just bringing it back under control to wildlife. Any animals, any wildlife in almost the entire woods would have been very aware of what was happening there at quite a distance, and that would have impacted their behavior. Even our own enjoyment of the woods can be lessened by audio impacts. Bear in mind that there are people that are quite deathly afraid of dogs. So hearing that when they're deeper into the trail or they've just arrived might have quite an impact on them as well in terms of how they'll enjoy their visit to the woods. Now, the rest of my trip on that day was absolutely perfect in terms of actually enjoying the woods. So it's not something that should be greeted with often, and it's not something that I want to dwell upon, but again, it's just something I wanted us to consider as we think about our impacts in the area. Now, I want to take us through a little bit about the actual reasons why Knocksink is that important in terms of why it's a special area conservation. Now, very quickly, there are 3 really special habitats located within the confines of the woods. Now, it's a small woods, remember, so these areas are fairly easy to find. Now, what you'll see beside each of them on screen is a number. Now, that number is from the Natura 2000 Habitats Code. And you can use those numbers to look up these habitats. They're specific habitats, but they are particularly important. And it's that importance which leads itself to being a special area conservation. So just to give you a very quick rundown of what each of them are. So the first one is an old oak woodlands. Now, an old oak woodlands, the name can be a little deceptive because it's not necessarily one big giant ancient oak wood. You would generally find oak trees there. So that is something you will get. It's usually sessile oaks, but it doesn't have to be. The other oak that we have natively in Ireland is the pedunculate oak. The soil tends to be acidic and it tends to be well drained. So you're talking about a kind of deciduous woodland. It usually has oaks. There's other trees scattered in there as well. And that'll be one. You'll find them scattered around the country in different areas. The second one is the alluvial forest. Now, alluvial forests are areas that are usually beside rivers. They're always relatively close to water. And the reason that makes them special is they are flooded periodically, but they are well drained otherwise. So they are areas that will have flooding, but they do drain well once it drains. The last one then is my particular favorite. It is absolutely fascinating. It is the Petrifying Springs. Petrifying, two things it can mean. Obviously, if someone's petrified, it means they're frightened. But if we think about the kind of older use of the word, to petrify means like to turn to stone. So if you think of the old Greek myth with Medusa, she used to turn people to stone, that was petrification. So what this means is there's not water there that'll obviously turn us to stone, but so there's the water that is around the area. Some of the water sources are quite lime rich, and they deposit something called tufa. It's not a word that you'll come across often, but tufa is a type of rock that is porous and calcareous. So think of like a pumice stone, like with the little ones you'd use to almost those little massage stones. So they've got lots of small holes, and they contain calcium. The reason why they're so important is there are plants that will almost only grow in that environment. So it's really, really rare because almost everything else can't survive in that kind of area. The high levels of calcium just don't lend themselves to many things living there. But the plants that do live there are extremely special. And finding the Petrifying Springs, there are some areas that are very easy to find. And I can't stress enough that finding these around the country is quite difficult. So Knocksink is one of the best places where you can actually see them and learn about these unbelievable areas. And I'm going to show you some pictures of them as we go. I've got some pictures of the real dramatic ones as well. So I was going to use this opportunity to see if there's any questions so far, but unless, Rachel, I think from what I can tell, we're okay, but if there's anything.
No questions have come through on the chat at the moment.
Perfect, excellent, yeah, that's great. Perfect, we'll continue on. So just to, again, bring you through those actual habitats. Now, an oak tree is one of the most recognizable that you'll find. The leaves are very distinct. You can see them starting to turn here now as we came into winter when this photo was taken. Now, I'm going to diverge ever so slightly here, but because so many of the habitats we look at, and because Knocksink is a woodland, our relationship with trees in Ireland has changed so dramatically over the entire time people have lived here. Some of you might be familiar with the Brehon laws, which was the legal system in Ireland hundreds of years ago, so before our current legal system. And very basically, the Brehon laws were how people were punished for committing crimes, and it was based on a fine system. So if a crime was committed, there would be a fine associated with it. Now, one of the most fascinating things in the Brehon laws was how important certain trees were. So different trees were considered different levels of importance. There was noble trees, and there was commoner trees, and there was lower levels then as you went down. Now, the oak is one of the noble trees. And the punishment for chopping down an oak tree that wasn't yours came with a fine, and the fine was, well, it was officially 2.5 milking cows. It's not cutting a cow in half, it'd be useless, but it'd be 2 fully grown milking cows and then a younger milking cow as well, which is a huge fine to pay for anyone. It's a very large amount of value. Even in today's standards, it's expensive. What's fascinating is the fine for murder, for killing someone, was also 2.5 milking cows. It was the exact same fine. So cutting down a noble tree like the oak or committing murder were seen as equally heinous in Ireland up until a few hundred years ago. Now, that level of importance in trees has unfortunately slipped away a little bit, but it just gives you a sense of how we were connected to them as a people, and how the importance we put on them, because they provided everything: wood, food. It was said that you could fatten an entire pig in a year from one good oak tree. That was what they used to say. So you'll spot oak trees all over the woods. And this is an actual image from the habitat that's there. It looks quite like the other parts of the woods. And this is the thing, that there's usually not a very clear divide between what are the special habitats and what aren't. It's about knowing the specific plants that are there. So once you get your eye in and you kind of learn what each tree is, what each plant is, you can get a really good sense of exactly why some areas are important. But the old oak woodland in Knocksink is a really beautiful part of the woods, and many of you have probably seen it and walked through it. It is one of the prettier parts of it as well, so I'm sure you've taken notice of it if you've been there. Now, the alluvial forest is quite different. This is the one that floods periodically. So you can see a good image here in terms of showing that. So here you've got actually in floods. So generally speaking, you're talking about close to a water source, but not sitting in the river. And you can see the ground is muddy, wet, everything's growing around it. And quite soon after this, it will drain and stay well drained until the flooding again, usually in the next year. But it depends on the levels of rain. So the alluvial forest can appear anywhere near water sources. But again, it's about recognizing those signs of where exactly it is. And it's hard to tell, given that they flood periodically. So you don't know if it's an alluvial forest, if it's a very dry part of the year, or if it's a very wet part of the year. It's about revisiting the site over and over, and you'll see it change throughout the seasons. You'll get a good sense of the alluvial forest. Now, my favorite one then, as I mentioned, was the Petrifying Springs. Now, there are a few beautiful examples of these in Knocksink. This is one of the most dramatic. To find it, you would go in through the car park, go to the first bridge, cross over, and go down a little bit. It's on the left. You'll hear the little waterfall go as you go. Now, we'll get a little bit of a close-up there. So this is what we're talking about in terms of the Tufa Formation. So most of the Petrifying Springs in this area, and in a lot of the other areas you find them in around Ireland, tends to be not quite so dramatic. There's usually not a waterfall associated with them, like we have here, these little mini waterfalls. Generally, as you walk around Knocksink, keep an eye on any of the wet ground just off the trail. And if you spot little white flecks in the water or on the ground there, what you're seeing is seepage, so water seeping out of the ground. But again, that highly calcified water that leads to the formation of this habitat. So an exceptionally rare one that is beautiful to find, but actually here in Knocksink, one of the easiest places to go to actually see it. So if anyone hasn't noticed it before, keep an eye out the next time you're there. You will find it if you go looking for it, because you'll see those little white flecks, or you'll come across this little waterfall here. And how does it form? I mean, very simply, that's it. It is a constant flow of water. So the real danger to the site is if something impacts that flow of water. So if something was to be built off-site that deflected the flow of water, or if something were to happen in Knocksink that deflected the flow of water, that's the real issue with the Petrifying Springs. So keeping those water sources flowing the way they should, or seeping out of the ground the way they should, is the best way of protecting the Petrifying Springs. So I'm going to take you on a little trip now, just in terms of talking about what some of the most visually stunning things you'll find actually living in the habitats that we're in. So I'm going to start with fungus and mushrooms. So there's loads of different types you can find in the woods, absolutely tons, depending on the type of year, if it's been raining or not. So I just have an example of a couple of them, including my favorite one to find. But this isn't it here, despite the fact these are. So what you have here are the Mica Cap. So Mica Caps are fairly common mushrooms that you will get kind of growing in woodlands. What you may find, some of you may be foragers and may do mushroom foraging, or may do something like wild garlic or any other foraging that you might get. A couple of things to note with regards to foraging. Ideally, we really should get permission from where we're foraging to go foraging. But even ignoring that, in terms of the site that we're at in Knocksink, it's very important, again, because it's the nature reserve and because it's an SAC, that we actually try and avoid foraging. The reason, again, is that special area of conservation, that nature reserve. There are things growing here which include fungus and mushrooms that we mightn't realize but are exceptionally rare, or animals or plants that live there rely on them. So in removing them, and there are, don't get me wrong, there are excellent ways of foraging that involve people not actually leaving a lot of damage. Like a good forager does so without impacting the area around them, and it can be done. But it is something that should be considered in somewhere like a nature reserve. Now, another little point on foraging, just on safety, particularly with mushrooms, is obviously, unless you are 100% sure what you're doing, and unless you're with someone who definitely knows what they're doing, I couldn't recommend enough not to forage them. There's too much risk in terms of accidentally picking mushrooms that are poisonous, and there are mushrooms that look very like edible mushrooms that are poisonous. So just be very careful. If you're well versed in foraging, you'll know yourself. Identifying mushrooms can be tricky, but it can be done. But it's a slow skill to learn. So it does take actually going out with someone who knows what they're doing a little bit before you do it. But with regards to Knocksink, I would think, is there just anywhere else that you could do the same foraging that isn't a special area conservation or isn't a nature reserve? Now, one that you'll find quite often on the side of trees is the puffballs. So they tend to be quite large, quite striking mushrooms. So they'll be unusual in of their location, so often on trees. And then the one that is actually my absolute favorite is these ones here. And this is a little bit of a close-up one. So some of you may have seen this before. This is called witch's butter. Witch's butter tends to grow on dead trees that have fallen down after, you'll get the fruiting part of it, these little mushrooms coming up when it's a bit wet. They're quite solid at first, and then as they age, they turn into this goopy jelly kind of slime that you can see there, which is how they get their name, witch's butter. But an absolutely spectacular mushroom in terms of it just looks like almost nothing else you're going to see there because of the color and how it changes and adapts over time, basically melting back into the tree. Fiber caps are common enough as well. You'll see them scattered around the woods. They tend to be fairly individual. I mean, they look a little bit like just little nipples in the ground as you pass them by. So they're quite noticeable, but you generally won't see a lot of them all at once. But again, definitely an amazing thing to actually go looking for in the woods. And Knocksink is a fantastic resource for actually finding mushrooms. And if you want to get into identifying mushrooms, it's a brilliant place to go and kind of bring up a guide and see, take some pictures, see if you can find out what they are. They are a tricky group to get the species. Now, I'm going to take a break for some of the amazing things that we can see, and we'll move a little bit into the crux of the project, which is dealing with the impacts. So every time someone visits a site, anything at all, when we go out the door, there is a chance that when we leave the house, we will leave an impact on the area we go to. And the hope is that the more we learn about an area, the more we learn about our own behavior, we can reduce those impacts. So this is a lot of what we want to kind of talk about today and over the course of this project, It's how do we actually reduce the impacts to Knocksink while not reducing visits. So I don't want people to not go to Knocksink. I want everyone to continue to go and appreciate its fantastic place. But how do we do it where we can have less of an impact each time we go, therefore restoring the area and bringing it back to what it's meant to be, its most natural state. So when I talk about responsible outdoor recreation or impacts, you use a little bar like you can see here. Now, I could go out at the weekend, visit Knocksink, and in doing so, I could actually end up leaving quite a lot of impact. I could go camping, I could have a campfire, I could leave my litter behind, and then just for fun, maybe throw an axe at a tree and practice my aim doing that. And that's going to leave fairly large amounts of impact in the area. Now, ideally, what we would do is we try and adjust our behavior. So it's still by visiting Knocksink, but maybe by me not throwing axes at trees, maybe by me not camping or not having a campfire, I can bring myself much further towards having no impacts. Now, such a dramatic jump doesn't need to happen. Everyone doesn't need to go from being quite impactful to being saints in terms of our outdoor use. It's a journey that just involves us thinking about how we use the outdoors every time we go. Nobody's perfect. Nobody at all is perfect. Every one of us makes mistakes. Every one of us leaves an impact from time to time, either accidentally or intentionally. So it does happen. So there's no berating in terms of our behaviors. But as long as we're moving in the correct direction down the line, even if it's a small amount, that's perfect. That's what we're looking for, a constant move in the right direction. If we can go from significant impacts to few in one big leap, even better. But as long as we're moving in that direction, it'll be in the right direction. And you'll see me kind of refer back to this as we talk about some of the specific problems that Knocksink faces. So tree damage is fairly common in the area. Now, there are different forms of tree damage. One of them, you'll probably see things like this in Knocksink and in other sites, and it's usually caused by axe throwing. It's what I mentioned earlier. And the thing is with axe throwing, the tree bark, well, trees in general, they're looked at as being very powerful, protected, ancient things that seem barely alive. But the bark on a tree is its skin. And when we cut through that bark or damage that bark, it opens the tree up to infection. And this can happen very easily. It's surprisingly easy to kill a tree by doing something as simple as cutting into the bark even a little bit. They are more delicate than they look. So again, understanding that relationship with the tree and how delicate it is a really good step in understanding how we interact with the outdoors. Now, somewhat more nefarious then, you'll see quite a few examples of fires being set on the trees themselves. So these are people who are very likely attempting to burn down trees that are in the woods. So a hugely destructive practice, very obviously impactful, and one that is surprisingly common in certain sections of the wood. Graffiti is one that you will get quite a lot there as well. This is one thing that we're going to tackle on some of our impact days. And there's if you ever have, this can work on your own trees and stuff at home, if you do ever end up getting graffiti on your trees. What you can do is with a little bit of vegetable oil and a wire brush, and you gently but firmly scrub the graffiti off the tree, it'll actually remove the graffiti without damaging the tree itself. So you can't scrub too hard because again, that bark isn't, it does damage, but you can definitely remove graffiti off a tree without actually removing the bark. Now, the graffiti itself, depending on what the paint is, the graffiti can obviously damage the tree through poisoning, but graffiti, like litter and like kind of campfires, it kind of breeds more graffiti. So when it's there, more of it kind of spawns and comes along. So reducing it is important, not just in terms of protecting the trees, but in terms of enjoyment of the wood. When walking through a wood and you see graffiti, it often leads people to be a little bit more anxious about the area. Is it a safe area that you're in? Who else is around? So it does put a little bit of unease on people, and it does reduce enjoyment. So impacts don't just mean on the environment, it's also talking about the wood itself. So going back to our spectrum here, so it's hard to argue that axe throwing, setting trees on fire, and graffiti aren't anything but very significant impacts. Now, there's very few times I'll say this, but there's not really any way of dealing with these things other than just not doing them. The only way to really kind of reduce impacts on this is to not do them, because there's no way of throwing an axe at a tree and having not as much impact, or setting the tree on fire and having not as much impact. They are all extremely impactful actions, but not every action is so clean cut, and often most of them are very gray in terms of how we deal with it. Now, anyone familiar with the site will know that overcrowding is something that happens quite often. Weekends, bank holidays, summertime, good weather. Now, as well as limiting the enjoyment that we would have in the area, it does have an ecological impact as well. The picture I took here of the tire marks in the ground coming out of the car park or going in, often there because there was overcrowding. That little verge did actually have orchids growing on it a few years ago. Those orchids at the moment don't grow there anymore because of the damage to that verge and how the road kind of has been pushed in by use. Now, nature is absolutely amazing at healing if given the chance. It would only take a few years of that area not being impacted for either those orchids or another plant to come back in their place. So it can be done. Now, how do you manage overcrowding? Well, there's limited space to park there. Now, it's on a bus route, so I mean, getting public transport helps. And the difficult decision, and I know it's not easy, but arriving at the site, seeing that it's full, and then turning around and going somewhere else is an option. And it's not a particularly enjoyable option if this is where you've wanted to go, but if we adjust the times we visit a place, it should hopefully reduce the impacts and also the stress of trying to park somewhere where it's just absolutely full to the brim. And again, we need to remember that a problem that Knocksink has faced in the past and still faces to this day is access for emergency services. It has been so full at times that emergency services haven't been able to get in to deal with situations that are occurring in the woods. And that is a very human impact that is also there, separate to the ecological one. Now, we can't really talk about any site without discussing litter, without the usual kind of long spiel. Two main types of litter: accidental and intentional. People drop things all the time and don't realize it. Tissues out of pockets, wrappers out of pockets, that happens. Totally natural, we all do it. The only way to really combat something like that accidentally is to just get used to maybe bringing something like a pack, like a backpack or a rucksack, have a little lunchbox maybe in it, and then anything you have, either pop it into the bag or pop it into the lunchbox, seal it up, and you're less likely to drop something like the bag on your back or the lunchbox than you are to drop a tissue or a wrapper out of your pocket. So a little change in behavior should have a good impact on accidental litter. Now, a large portion of the litter that we have then is intentional, and that comes down to a change in behavior, convincing people to essentially follow the mantra of pack it in and pack it out. Whatever you bring with you, just hang on to it until you get back to the entrance and until you get back to your car, back home, and that way you can dispose of it the way it should be disposed. So people have all brought these things in, and they've chosen then not to bring them back. So it is obviously a never-ending battle, but the more we kind of engage with people in terms of just considering bringing what they have brought back with them, it should lead to a more positive impact for the area. Now, not all things that you find there are immediately litter. This is obviously a dog lead that was lost there, and I'm probably pretty sure that whoever lost it probably found it before they left it. Obviously, sometimes you get things that are lost and don't get recovered, and they become litter over time. But again, accidental litter, we can forgive it as the intention behind it wasn't there to cause problems. So it does happen. It'd be very hard to have a completely litter-free zone, but certainly with a slight adjustment in how we bring things home with us, it should have a huge impact. Now, I want to briefly talk a little bit about what is certainly a pet peeve of mine, and it's the dog poo in the bag. So a couple of things to note about dog poo. One, obviously from an environmental perspective, if your dog goes to the toilet and you feel the absolute need that you definitely are going to leave it there and you're not going to take it home, then not bagging it is generally, and I hesitate to say, but it's generally better than bagging and leaving the bag there, because at least the poo will degrade then. But what you should be aware of, and what we need to kind of get across to people as well, is that a dog's poo has a very distinct predatory smell about it, and that will completely change the behavior of the animals that live in the area. So if the poo is left there, that will change their behavior in a negative way. What really kind of gets me is the bagging and leaving behind, because the intention, obviously, bag, you're there, you've got your bag, you've bagged it, a lot of the work is done, but leaving the bag then behind only to then have a bag of poo that survives for how long is one that is difficult. So if we can, again, engage with people just to get them to continue to finish the job there, carry their poo home, will make a big difference on it. And even the picture there on the left of the poo being thrown into the branches, I mean, that just makes it much harder for anyone to get, even if they didn't want to get it. Like if it was left on the side of the track, at least someone could pick it up and bring it home, or someone can bring it to a bin, but to throw it onto a branch makes it almost impossible for anyone to deal with it without a lot of work. Now, you've got your other general normal types of litter again. I won't spend too much time on this. We've seen them all. How a pair of socks ends up as litter in the woods, who knows, but probably a camping incident, I'm sure. Now, we move out of the kind of real obvious negatives to, again, into that bit more of a gray area. So bushcraft and the building of shelters. Now, as a child, finding one of these would have been absolutely amazing. Just complete excitement. You'd go in, you'd play in it, to see it there built, absolutely just mind-blowing when you're young. Now, in terms of how they impact an area, so again, I want you to consider I'm not saying don't build these shelters, don't have them, but just in terms of where we are. So if we're in an SAC, Special Area Conservation, or if we're in a nature reserve, are the impacts of building the shelter worth having the shelter there? Because there are other parts of Ireland, of Dublin, of Wicklow that we can go to where building these kind of shelters will have a much more reduced impact. And just to give you an idea of some of those impacts, the area that this shelter is in would have been an area that would have had tons of wild garlic growing in it years ago. That wild garlic largely doesn't grow anymore because footfall in that area has increased dramatically. So we don't get it. There's still wild garlic in the woods, but not in the area that's in. The shelters attract large groups of people, and they would have attracted me as a child. They attract everyone kind of generally there. They're a focal point. So people go over there and they go to the areas. So by attracting people over, the impact on the vegetation in the area can be more significant than we think. Now, if I bring us back to our spectrum here and we think, okay, so obviously no shelters has a very small impact. But if we had a shelter and then dismantled it when we were done, so we built it, we set it up, we used it, we dismantle it and replace everything back to where we found it, the impact actually stays quite small. So it's not as good as having no shelter, but certainly not something that's beyond the realm of a small impact. Within leaving the shelter up means that anything that lived around that area, the cover that wood was there in terms of the animals that were living there, has now, because it's left up, their homes have been moved and it's altered the natural state of the woodland. So again, I just want to again get us kind of thinking, is there a way that we can just move from one side in any direction down towards the other? So it doesn't have to be a jump from building shelters to not building shelters. Even just convincing people to dismantle the shelters afterwards will have a significant positive impact for the area. Imagine if everyone dismantled those shelters, and those areas no longer were focal points for large groups of people, that area then could recover, wild garlic could come back, and then you'd have that beautiful wild garlic little ground cover when it grows again, which is a fantastic thing to have and see that we could have again in that specific area if we give it a chance to recover. Now, the next item is good-natured but destructive practices. Now, this is an unusual one, and I fully understand the reasoning behind this. Many people will take action in order to help a woodland, and this is likely what this is. These are wood vines that have been cut that are growing in trees in Knocksink. Almost every single wood vine in the woods has been cut in the same way. Now, you might see these and assume that this was done by the National Parks and Wildlife Service as a way of managing the wood, but this was done by an individual or groups of individuals on their own merit, largely because the idea that the wood vines are killing the trees and that they're saving the trees, which is it's a noble reason for doing it, but it's not always the case. Interference on this scale in a woodland can have significant problems. What I would suggest, because this woodland, two things that we should know. It's a woodland that we want things to grow naturally the way they're supposed to grow. So if trees are going to be killed naturally, they should be allowed to be killed naturally. But on a second part of that, the woodland isn't just left to run wild. It is to a point, but it's also managed to a degree that most of the things that go on there, as long as they're known about, a plan is put in place to determine how much of an impact they might cause. So when we take it into our own hands in terms of dealing with these problems, such as wood vines, it can shift the balance of the nature in the area that wasn't actually beneficial to the area. What I would suggest for anyone who is worried or concerned about anything in the woods, such as if you spot something like wood vines, or if you spotted ivy, or you thought that something was in danger, again, engage. The knowledge is the key here. You might have spotted something that will actually hugely benefit the woodland if someone like for example, I'm not saying if the National Parks and Wildlife Service knew about it, they mightn't have seen what you've spotted so far. And by telling them, then they can use what they already know about the woods to deal with the problem in a really efficient way. But by not sharing the knowledge first and not engaging, it just could lead to something done good-naturedly, but causing quite a significant impact down the road. So I would ask, just again, consider what we're doing in an area, how much of an impact our actions will have. We could end up protecting woodlands in a much better way. Now, fire rings. I'm gonna do a little bit of a little mini kind of activity here for you. What I want you to do is consider, when I did my first visit to Knocksink, I stayed on the track and started from the car park, walked up on the trail, and then walked back. And I didn't veer off the trail because I just wanted to get a sense of the area again after years of not being there. In my walk, I came across quite a number of fire rings. Have a little guess in your mind. I'll give you just 20 seconds. Come up with a number. How many fire rings visible from the main trails do you think I came across in my visit, my first visit to the site in how many years? So I will tell you. So we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's always a good one. I'm going to burn a big giant log, despite the fact it's way too big for a fire. You'll see these kind of fires. 7, 8, 9, 10. So there was 10 remnants of fire pits in the main trail, and most of them were visible from each other. So I could see 3 of them from the trail, all within a couple of meters of each other. Now, dismantling these fire pits, I don't know if anyone's dismantled a fire pit before, it actually takes quite a lot of work and can be quite difficult. So despite the fact that the National Parks and Wildlife do dismantle these as often as they can when they find them, they spring up faster than they can deal with them. This is the idea I was talking about earlier in terms of if there's something there like graffiti or fire pits or litter, it propagates more of the same. So when someone sees a fire pit, they think, oh, that's a good idea. Look, there's 3 fire pits here. Let's make our own. I don't want to use that one, it's dirty. We'll make our own one, it'll be much better. And these kind of bump up from each other, these many things that continue to grow. So one of the things I'd like to do as part of our project is actually do one big blitz, remove all the fire pits at once, which will, or should, drastically slow down the spread and should hopefully make it much easier to control, because trying to dismantle them as 1 or 2 people can be exceptionally hard. There's a lot of work in dismantling properly. Also have to be sure that the fire is completely cold. Fires can stay hot for a really long time. So it's a safety issue as well. If someone's left a fire, they've gone home, and a family walks through, well, a dog that they're walking or a child there, if they don't notice the fire pit there, or if they come up to investigate it, obviously it's a recipe for disaster, because it is surprisingly hot for a surprisingly long amount of time. So where do fires sit on our spectrum? Now we'll take ourselves out of Knocksink for just a moment. So completely out of Knocksink, just generally fires, where are we? So no fire leaves no impact. A mound fire, which is using a kind of mountain of inorganic material to keep the heat off the ground. So you build a little kind of mountain, you put a little fire blanket down, and you can have a small fire on top of that, is quite good at having minimum impact. A pre-existing fire ring, so if you have your fire on an old fire, you're minimizing the damage with regards to not creating a new fire ring, but the heat is still going to penetrate the ground and kill any new life that is under the ground. Your new fire ring is going to have a big impact because it's going to damage a whole new area. And obviously, when we discuss fires in a wood, we can't discuss it without wildfires. Only think about Killarney National Park, the Mourne Mountains, the issues that happened recently, and just how out of control they can go so quickly. Now, bring us back to Knocksink at the moment. And the key in Knocksink, again, is no fire. And there are places where it's appropriate to have campfires and to camp. I'm not saying don't have them, but in an area where it's a special area of conservation and when it's an area of nature reserve, it's convincing people that there are better ways and better places to do this. So Knocksink just isn't a suitable site for these. Remember, there is no camping and no fires because it's a nature reserve. So it's not an arbitrary one, it's because of these things. Now, we've come up to a break point again, and if I come back to Rachel very quickly, Rachel, if there's anything that
we do have, actually a few questions have come in, so and a few comments. But I'm just going to go back up to some of the earlier ones and then we'll work our way down through. So earlier we had from Liz, Frank Klisman, geologist, was asking about the name of Knocksink, wondering if Knocksink, the sink part, meaning zinc, as related to the tufa, galvanizing the twigs and the leaves.
Interesting point. And actually, when I was discussing this with my Irish name expert, he did mention that the think part might have actually come after and not actually been associated with Irish. So might have been a bit of a mix where the knock is the Irish part and the sink, because sink is such an unusual and non-Irish kind of name and doesn't seem to fit in with the Irish language, that he said there was a very strong possibility as if it is either English or another language kind of came in. So there is a possibility of something like that, where where it's not actually, it's an Irish and an English, or an Irish and another language coming together, making it a little more complex and a lot more difficult for someone to pinpoint. I will again ask if anyone has a document or something that pinpoints this, just from a personal point of view. I'm fascinated with names, so if anyone has something like that. But absolutely, my I think that the mystery of the name is still there. But yeah.
Okay, so our next questions, working down there, we have in relation about having a ranger in place at Knocksink to help in the protection of it, if you know that's a possibility. And there was just a few comments of general agreement that'd be very nice to have a ranger in place to help protect the site and raise awareness.
Yeah, that's a ranger, was it?
Yes.
Ah, perfect. Yeah. So there's actually, so some of you will be aware of the National Parks and Wildlife Service rangers that are in the area. So Knocksink itself doesn't have a dedicated 7-day-a-week ranger. I have no doubt if offered and funding was there, the NPWS would absolutely have one. But the team of rangers there does visit as often as they can. I think Andrea Webb is the ranger that is working with me on the project. And if you're down at the site, you'll see her walking around, and yeah, she'll be happy to talk to you about any issues. And I know she's the one who took me around on a tour when I first arrived and kind of showed me the impacts and discussed the NPWS's strategy for dealing with them. And it's really a matter of just the scale and the constant, like the fire rings, they spring up at a rate that is very difficult to combat in terms of just the sheer amount. But yeah, no, I think I don't think anyone would disagree that having a dedicated ranger would be a fantastic help to the area. But hopefully in time the NPWS can be able to offer one. But it's always down to funding, isn't it?
Okay, and we have then another question from Kevin Warner. So it's a little bit outside the scope of this project, but I just wanted to raise it with the group. So it's in a wonderful part of the woods on the southwest side is in private ownership. Part of its developers' land, but is in the SAC. And just question, is there any move to bring this part into public ownership? There's some wonderful oaks and tufa streams, but also a lot of litter, especially since the lockdown, with much of the refuse being removed from the area.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, in terms of is there any plan? To be honest, like I don't know. That level of engagement is beyond what we're doing in the project at the moment, but yeah, it'd be great if an agreement could be reached and the remaining SAC area was to be incorporated. I don't think anyone would say no to that if it was a possibility. So I'm sure it's on the card somewhere, but whether or not it's possible, that's another story.
And then we have a question in and around dog waste and the disposal of it. What's the best possible way? And is there a negative impact of opening the dog poo bag and flushing the contents down the toilet?
I think generally in terms of dog waste, the best practice at the moment is, unfortunately, in terms of landfill, there is a chance that your waste management system in terms of flushing it may not be designed to cope with non-human waste. There's just differences in terms of consistency and what's in it. So although flushing it might not be the worst solution, I wouldn't advise it, just in terms of, because it depends on who actually deals with the waste and where. It's not an easy solution, dog waste, because putting it in landfill obviously puts it in landfill, but it's a very hard one to degrade as well, and leaving it in somewhere like woods, like I mentioned, will impact the wildlife. So I know obviously leaving it somewhere seems like a nice idea. It's just that impact on the wildlife, as they're afraid the predatory smell of it, and it changes their behavior. So it's a great question, and it's one that it doesn't have an easy answer, not yet. No one's figured out a great way to deal with it environmentally yet.
Okay, then we have a question in relation to the building in the car park that is owned by the MPWS. Do you have any suggestions as to how it could be put back into use to help this Knocksink project?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we'll talk about throughout the project, but the building was an education centre up until unfortunately funding meant that it couldn't be kept open. But I'm really hoping that through this project we can kind of garner enough support and interest in how amazing Knocksink is and what can be achieved there, and the potential that it might reach enough of the right people that we can get support for reopening it. So it's a completely a funding issue, but again, there's no one on site or no one in the area that wouldn't like to see it reopened. So if the project in the future helps, which is one of the things that we'd hope to come down the line after this project, we'd be delighted to see it reopened as an education centre, because it's a fantastic resource. So hopefully, fingers crossed, yeah, we can just get the support we need. So I agree, yeah, I'd love to see it used.
Thank you. And we have then a question looking at, is there any proposal or support for removing quilcher pine trees and replacing them in stages with native wood species?
And that is probably something that goes beyond the scope of the project we have. It's way too big. But it's a good question that yeah, I think we can pass it along to the MPWS and see what their plan is. I'm sure they have a plan in motion in terms of what to do with the area. I know these things take time, is the only thing that sometimes things just take that little bit of extra time. But yeah, hopefully something can come out of it. But yeah, I will make sure it gets passed along. Sorry, but yeah, it's beyond our scope, I'm afraid.
And I suppose then the last question actually is perhaps in a way connected to that, in that it's plans for the control of rhododendron in the wood, but I suppose that again would feed into any biodiversity plans that the MPWS would have for the site.
Yeah, and actually in terms of the dealing with invasive species, it's quite difficult no matter what site you're on, because when you look at things like rhododendron, or when you look at things like Japanese knotweed, the actual removal of them can be more destructive in terms of the spread than leaving them. I know that sounds crazy. In terms of what we can do, what I would suggest is a little personal biosecurity. And what I mean by that is the easiest thing. When you've finished your walk or your cycle or whatever you're doing in Knocksink, either have a little hard bristle brush in the boot of your car and just scrub your boots off. Ideally, when you get home, give your boots like a quick wash, just that, or your bike tires a quick wash, and leave them to dry. You want to leave them for 48 hours if you can, and that will prevent any spread. So there's very little we can do as individuals for tackling invasive species in such a large scale area, but with personal responsibility and checking your boots, because it's unfortunately the people who love these areas so much, like us, who go to these places. I mean, no one's on this webinar who doesn't appreciate the outdoors or doesn't appreciate Knocksink. That's the whole reason everyone's here. But we're the ones that are most likely to spread invasive species. It's not the people who don't care sitting at home. It's one of those things where it's the one thing where people who love the outdoors are probably more likely to cause damage than people who don't care about the outdoors. So your best bet for invasive species is to just do that little bit of washing and scrubbing of your boots, and that will just make a huge difference in prevention. So just to give people a sense of what else is there, because I know rhododendron comes up, but like Himalayan balsam, hogweed, traveler's joy, butterfly bush, and laurel, I think are some of the ones. So there's a lot of invasives there that are being managed as part of the national parks and wildlife services plan, but they can spread so easily that just a little bit of extra care when we're there should help prevent that. I know it's not easy because, yeah, if you're like me and you like going from wood to wood and really exploring, you just put yourself at a much higher risk of spreading. So that little bit of extra care is often needed for people like all of us who travel in these areas.
Okay, and then there's a final question here about pet poo or pet waste. Is it okay in a dedicated compost heap for that type of waste furthest away from a wild area of a garden?
Yeah, I think if you've managed to if you've managed to have a dedicated compost heap, and your compost heap has enough mixed materials in terms of the common greens and browns, like your leaf litter, your garden waste, and your browns, like your little pieces of scrap newspaper, cardboard, that kind of thing, it can degrade and compost quite easily. You have to be careful that you're not adding too much. Pet waste can alter how that compost is done. It can also, it is also the idea of transmission of disease. So you just have to be careful how you handle that compost until it's fully composted. I would just suggest, but if you know what you're doing compost wise, perfect. I wouldn't start a compost heap and add pet waste to it. I would have non-pet waste compost heaps for a while first to get used to how they are, how they should work, and how they should turn out. And then when you're used to it and you've got a good system, you can then potentially bring in small amounts of pet waste. But to be honest, it's not an ideal solution, but it's one that you can, I suppose, experiment with and see how it works for you and the amount of waste you're adding to. If you're using the compost yourself, I mean, it should be okay to work that way. So.
Okay, and just to note, there's a good bit of discussion actually around the site, around the education centre, and I see as well we have Andrea on the call. So yes, Andrea, if you would like to unmute, by all means, you're very welcome to answer some of the questions that are coming through.
Hi there, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, perfect.
Cool, sorry, I'm on my mobile, I've had IT difficulties. So just regarding the building there in Knocksink, so at the moment it is actually a functional building, and it is an office for some of the Dublin Rangers. Obviously it's pretty, because of COVID, there's not too many people other than myself going in and out of the building. But as was commented there by Melanie, we're looking to get the roof fixed up, and also wastewater treatment that needs to be fixed up. So it's in our minds, and hopefully we'll have something working out of that building at some stage. So when that'll be, it's all down to funding really. So that's the building. With regard to the invasive species in there, so we will be going into the native woodland scheme at some stage, and they will be the first things to be removed. Like probably the first thing would be the likes of traveller's joy and butterfly bushes, that type of thing. So that's all within the draft management plan of the area. Let me see, ranger, full-time ranger, wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? So yeah, we don't have a volunteer system within MPWS, but I mean, that's exactly what the site needs. And there's within Wicklow, there's several nature reserves that could do with a full-time person there, but it's just the nature of it. We have to do with what we have, and we do our best. And I like to talk to people when I'm in the woodlands, and if anybody wants to chat to me when I'm there or email me with any concerns or anything, it's great to have that contact. So extra eyes on the ground is always really helpful, and people get to places I'm not able to get to on a regular basis. So people are feeding into me what's things that are going on, and it's really, really helpful, and things do get done on foot of that. So always feel free to either ring me, email me, or whatever. It's a help. It really is. Let me see what else was there. Yeah, that's a lovely piece of land there on the southwest in private ownership. It's not up for sale. There isn't a procedure at the moment, and it would also come down to funding and the availability of land for purchase. But it is an SAC, so it is protected regardless of who owns it. And it's really lovely to see that people are out there and collecting litter. Unfortunately, it's not an area that I would go into to do that, because my area is such a wide area. So I think they're kind of the key point. Yeah, there was also just regarding the dogs on lead sign. That's a very interesting perspective that I got from one of the people that suggested that, because the visual of the nesting ground bird, that it's only a spring and summer thing, that's a very interesting point. Now that is a generic sign that we've put in all the nature reserve, and there's a similar sign that has National Parks and Wildlife Service on it. So it's just generic because we do have so many sites. But that's a very interesting perspective, which I'll certainly feed back to my colleagues. So yeah, thanks for that, and I'll sign out unless there's anything more.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And that would be it really, Padraic, for the question. So I'll hand back to yourself.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andrea. To have the expert to chat to us as well. Thank you so much. Guys, I am very conscious of the time. I told Rachel earlier I would not go over time, so I'm sorry. I just have a really quick last little bit. I'll go through a tiny bit more. Obviously, look, again, if anyone needs to leave, please do. I won't keep you long, but we'll send on anything. But there's just a couple of things and one quite exciting thing I'd like to do as well with the announcement from Ian. So I'm just going to go through a little section of some of the wildlife you can have. It's very quickly, but the photos are absolutely phenomenal, so I'd hate to skip them. So a lot of the photos you're going to see now are by Gillian Stewart, and just to give you a sense of just how amazing the place is, they're way better than any photos I could take there. So you've got the wild garlic, the ramsons, and the common frog. Then both squirrels are there on site, so the red and the grey. The grey hopefully not for much longer. The red even being there is fantastic, largely down to one of my favorite mammals, which is the pine marten. So the pine marten, its presence and spread back throughout Ireland has almost single-handedly heralded the return of the red squirrel, and it is removing the grey as an invasive species as it goes. So seeing reds along the east coast is fantastic, but largely thanks to these guys. And they are there, but they are known as one of Ireland's most elusive mammals. So yeah, good luck trying to find them. They are tricky, but they are absolutely amazing. Sometimes you'll see about them in your garden, which is really great. Really lucky to see them. If you see them, they are fantastic. It's not just animals though. The yellow archangel is a beautiful plant that you don't get in many places. Really beautiful. That flowers from about April to June usually. There's a hoverfly. I mean, how amazing that picture is for something that we would usually shy away from in terms of flies. But the ramsons hoverfly that lives obviously around the wild garlic will be there as well. So it's quite habitat specific. So you would get it living just in those kind of wild garlic areas. The picture on the left then is the bird's nest orchid. The wild garlic is there on the right. The bird's nest orchid is a fascinating plant. I haven't seen it in Knocksink myself, but I was in Glengara in Tipperary recently and did actually see some there, which is brilliant. It's quite a, you know, you'd walk right past it, you'd never really kind of take a second glance at it, but it's a fascinating plant. It's parasitic. It actually feeds on other living organisms, so it doesn't actually make its own food like most plants do. So it feeds on mostly things like fungal growths. Unusual color, very unusual looking plant, but tricky to find. And of course, you know, there's no more kind of beautiful summer sight really than butterflies. So your purple hair streak which is the one on the left, which is the one that lives on the top of oak trees. So again, it's elusive, it's hard to find, but it is up there. And then you've got the slightly easier one to spot, the speckled wood, which is there on the right. But just some of the many absolutely amazing things that you can find there at different times of year. Now, animal shelters are much easier to find. So if you don't find animals, don't berate yourself. Look for signs, look for sets and shelters. You might find remnants in terms of animal urine. You might find scat belonging to all sorts of animals, such as like Sika deer will be roaming the woods. They're quite a staple in that part of the country. So you get a lot of Sika deer that are around the place. Again, early morning, late evening, quiet times are your better chances to see them around the place. If it's very busy, they're going to steer clear of people. So yeah, the wildlife, the plants, you've got your ferns, your nettles, your liverworts, your mosses. It's all really amazing stuff that are there. Now, what's next in the project? Well, that's where I want to engage everyone here more. I'd like you to keep with us, join us again. In terms of what, well, one thing we want to do is increase citizen science. Andrea touched on it there. Like more people on the ground, the more eyes that are there. It's amazing what people can do with numbers. Like just with a large group of people getting more skilled themselves in being environmental and being protectful of where they live, of the environment, of what's on their doorstep. Anything at all, it's really making a huge impact. Citizen science is growing massively. So the National Biodiversity Data Centre kind of leads the citizen science initiative in terms of nature in Ireland. So you can go on to their citizen science portal and you can report sightings of rare plants and rare animals. It doesn't even have to be rare, you can just report anything, because the more you feed into the knowledge of where things are, the absolute better chance of good decisions being made, of protection of sites being done. So this is going to play a big part in one of our future meetups on site. But you can get an app, the Biodiversity Data Capture one, or you can do it online. But have a look at the National Biodiversity Data Centre's stuff. It is brilliant. If you need help identifying things, because I know it's hard getting used to it, people spend years learning how to identify plants and animals and mushrooms, and you will never be able to identify them all from your head. It's impossible, there's just too many. But physical identification keys, again, the National Biodiversity Data Centre have a beautiful set of like swatches and stuff that you can use that'll be able to help you identify different things. But there's all sorts of identification keys, so anyone at all that's geared towards Ireland and Irish things should point you in the right direction. If you want to go a bit more technological, things like Seek is an app that is free on your phone. It's not perfect in terms of its identification, but it is surprisingly good, and it's great to use with a key, or even to get you started in identification. It might bring you fairly close to the identification, and you just need to take it that last bit further by either looking online or using the key. But it's free, so it's definitely worth a go. And you just go around and you hold the camera up to whatever plant or animal you've got. It's much easier with plants because they don't move, but it's a fantastic one to try out. And to be honest, it's really, really easy. It's great to get kids involved with it as well. It really makes identification quite enjoyable and fun for someone getting into it. So definitely consider it as a tool. Google Lens does the same thing. Again, don't rely on it. It's not 100% accurate, but it is a great way to give you an idea of what something is. Now, sometimes you'll get something crazy suggested that lives in New Zealand, even though you've said you're in Ireland, and you're like, it can't be that because it doesn't live here. But you know, it's a work in progress. It's always getting better, but it's a great way to start your identification. And we generally always have a phone with us, so you can bring it along, take pictures of things, and try and identify them that way. Now, the project has several stages as we go on. One of the big things we're going to do in the new year is have impact days where anyone at all can come along. You sign up with us, I'll give you information on that, but come along. We'll be doing several days on site on the woods and actually taking part in restoration and citizen science. So the first day we're going to do is going to be based on restoration and cleanups. So this is going to be looking at things like dismantling the campfires, removing the graffiti, doing a litter pick, shelter removal, and then engaging in some trail protection measures. I'll be chatting to Andrea and the other members of the NPWS and talking about what best way at that time of year can we actually make the best impact in helping restore and clean up Knocksink. Because if we can tackle as a group a large swath of the issues, we can really have a really massive impact and stop that kind of endless propagation of campfires just popping up every single week because they're all over the place. So you're absolutely more than welcome to join us on this and bring along anyone who's interested. So yeah, no, the more the merrier. Again, all pending what happens in the new year and everything, but we'll discuss that when we get close to it. But if we can obviously do outdoor events such as this, we will be hosting this as one of them. And I would love to see you all there, and even just to talk to you in person and engage about the site on site. There's nothing that beats that. As much as I love the webinar, actually being there will be the best. The second day is going to be one giant bio blitz. For anyone unaware, that is going to be selecting several sites in Knocksink and doing a massive amount of identification. So we'll train you up in identifying, teach you how to use the keys, help you identify things, but also all the things that we identify will feed it all back into the National Biodiversity Data Center's database. So we will actually have a huge amount of data go back in to the database after this day. And the more of us that are there that do this, the better it is. And you will have people who know the area, know the plants, and know the identification keys that will help you and train you up in identifying things that are there. And it's always a work in progress. Like you'll never, no one's perfect at this, but it's a really fun, just outdoor activity to do as well. Once you get good at identifying, you can start with something like trees, and then move on to things like plants, and then go on to mushrooms and insects. But there's always something new to learn how to identify. But the second day will just be a massive bio blitz where we can get as many different species and many different areas as we can and feed that into the database. And that will help make informed decisions about Knocksink. So that information gets used in terms of what actually happens. So the more we do things like this, the more we feed into things like the database, the better it is for the sites that we want to protect. So please do join us. I would love to see you all there. Bring along everyone. It's going to be happening. We're going to set a date for the cleanup probably in January. So bring your coat and your hat. And then we'll be doing the bio blitz in February when we get a bit of life back into the year. That's not going to be the only things we do, but I will be, those dates will be set very soon, and you will have a chance to register and join, and we'd love to see you there. Now, I apologize to Ian Davis for keeping him. I was going to give him a time before now, but Ian, if you are still there, and I hope you are, I'll pass it over to you, and you can tell us the exciting news about the Pure project and your links to what we're doing.
Thank you. Actually, can you hear me?
I can indeed, Ian. Yes, you're
okay. Because I'm having major internet problems. Just the minute I'm supposed to come on and say something, it's all crashing. So thank you for inviting me on here this evening. And just to give you a brief background about the Pure project, I promise I will not stay long. And thank you, Padraic, for bringing us on an amazing tour of Knocksink Wood as well. It was great. My name is Ian Davis, and I'm the manager of the Pure project and the Pure Mile project as well. Now, the Pure project is the first of its kind in Ireland, and it was established in 2006 to combat illegal dumping in the Wicklow Dublin uplands, and it brings together a number of organisations, and they are the Department of Environment, Wicklow County Council, South Dublin County Council, Dunleary Rathdown, Creelcha, the National Parks and Wildlife Service, and the Wicklow Uplands Council. So we've been collecting illegal dumping for over 15 years, and we have collected and removed over 3,600 tonnes of illegal dumping from the Wicklow Dublin uplands, and that's a significant amount of illegal dumping. However, it is getting better, and one of the reasons why it is getting better is because of the Pure Mile. And the Pure Mile is a project I started back in 2010, and what it does is encourages communities, groups, organisations, walking groups, cycling groups, businesses, all types of people to improve and enhance the area they live in or an area they recreate in. The first year there were 6 miles of road, just 6, which we were very happy with. This year in 2021, we had over 800 miles of roads, mountains, woodlands, valleys, upland areas, even beaches. And we have thousands of Pure Mile volunteers who are just wanting to do something. And it demonstrates to me that people do want to make a difference. And if we encourage them and work with them, we can make that difference. There are a number of areas in the Enniskerry area that are involved in the Pure Mile already. They won an award last year for all the work they've done. There are too many areas to name, and I know one of the members is here tonight, so I'm not going to name them, because if I get one wrong, I know Melanie won't forget me or forgive me for it either. So I'm looking forward to working with Leave No Trace on this project. We can help in any way we can, providing Pure Mile signage, bags, litter picks, high-vis, gloves, and we have a big truck that can take away all of the material. So we will be working on a practical basis and helping with some of the communications as well. So that's my little bit. I know you've been all sitting here, so thank you very much. That's it.
Ian, thank you so much. Thank you. Sorry, I meant to have you on slightly earlier, but it's fantastic. Yeah, just the help that Ian has offered in terms of the project is phenomenal. And yeah, I can't imagine doing the project without you now, to be honest, with everything that we've been talking about over the last while. Yeah, so to be honest, everyone, that takes me towards the end now, and I know I've kept you nearly 15 minutes longer than I had planned to originally. What I'll do is very quickly first, just so, because I know, again, you've been here for a very long time, and thank you so much for sticking around and sticking through it. Just so you can keep so if you don't have my email's there. For anything that's relating to the project, you can contact me. To be honest, if you can contact me, Leave No Trace, and just mention the project, it'll come back to me anyway. But it's Padraic@leavenotraceireland.org. But any questions, any queries, anything that I can help with after this or down the line, please do get in contact, and I will help in any way that I can. If you need to rewatch this at any stage, we'll make it available. As I mentioned, it's recorded as well. But because I understand people will start leaving now, which is perfectly 100% fine. But while the last bit, just so I make sure that there's nothing, so if there is any questions, Rachel, that are pertinent or that have come up that you think we should best tackle before I officially end, I'll take them now. But obviously, guys, if anyone wishes to leave, I have kept you longer than I should have, and I really appreciate you joining us. I really hope to see you in the future in some form. Thank you so much, and please do leave. You don't need to feel bad about leaving. You can definitely leave now. And yeah, thank you so much. But hey, Rachel, if there's any questions, yeah, I'd love to.
No, very much. Just lots of comments coming in to say thank you for a great talk. Thank you to everyone. Great presentation. So no questions further.
You've all been very kind, I'm sure. Yeah, very kind. Brilliant, guys. Thank you all so much. That's fantastic. I'll save the chat, so all the questions are recorded as well. Anything that'll be kept as part of the project. So anything that has come up, if I've answered it a little bit, or if there's something that I couldn't answer, rest assured that it will be kept and passed along. And yeah, it'll be part of the discussions as we go forward. I think that's me. I could sit here and probably kind of waffle on and half say goodbye for the next 20 minutes. I won't. Everyone, thank you so much and enjoy your evening. It was an absolute pleasure.